podcast is a Christian program that may contain graphic descriptions of death, burial, and resurrection, and may not be suitable for those who deny the God who created them. Repentance and faith is advised. You're listening to the Bible Thumping Wingnut Podcast, the podcast that's safe for the whole family.
Unless your family contains professing atheists.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Bible Thumping Wingnut Podcast, originating Sunday nights live on YouTube. It is April 19th, 2020. My name's Tim Hurd. I'm the Bible Thumping Wingnut guy, and thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in. This is episode 382. 382. If you appreciate what's going on here, go also to my website, BibleThumpingWingnut.com, and check out not only this podcast, but 11 other podcasts, as well as blog articles, and one event, the Builders Summit, coming. The second annual Builders Summit is coming up. Got my trusty, only 8 of these mugs, Builder Summit, and so excited to have the Builder Summit. I've got one of the speakers with me today, as well as another well-known person to you, the audience of Bible Thumping Wingnut. What else did I want to say? Oh, announcement. Some of you have already figured it out. The Builders Summit registration is now open, and registrations are beginning to come in already. I'm sorry I didn't make it official. So, anyway, it's official now. It's open. A lot of people have been asking, and go to buildersummit.org and you can register right now. And all the details are there. Early bird registration, save a ton of money, the best value, even if you have to pay the full price right before you show up. It's a great value, but the price right now is really, really low for what you get at the Builder Summit. So go to buildersummit.org and register or find out more. Bring your church, bring everybody, all the men. All right. What else did I want to say before I show you who's on today? Actually, you already know one of the guests that are here because of the title. Michael Coughlin is a gentleman that I have not known for very long. I have known of for quite a while, but I have not known for very long. And the other person that is with us is a very close friend of mine, Len Pettis. Len Pettis is here as well. Are you guys able to unmute yourselves? I think I have to do it. Okay.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah, you are unmuted. Episode number 382. Welcome to the show, Michael Coughlin. This has to be the first time you're on.
I think it's the first time I've been on.
Yes. Michael Coughlin. I learned
Michael was on Bible Thumping Wingnut when I interviewed Phil Johnson.
Yeah, I was on you're right. 4 years ago this week.
4 years ago this weekend
but Tim wasn't there.
Right. I posted it. Yeah, you interviewed it, you sent the content to me and I posted it. That's still one of the clips is one of the most watched. Close to one of the most watched videos on BTWN. When you asked Phil Johnson, you asked him what his thoughts on James White. So that went semi-viral.
I'd like to ask that question today.
Yeah, it's good stuff. So anyway, I've known of Michael for quite a while. And kind of didn't get to know you until recently. I was going through something in my life, and Len says, Tim You should talk to Michael Coughlin about that, because Michael has a lot of insights into that. And this is what the Builders Summit is all about. Men encouraging other men, men opening up to each other, being open and honest, and helping one another. And Len's like, hey, you should give Michael a call. He's a great guy. He loves the Lord, and he's got some insights that could really help you with your walk with the Lord. And I reluctantly did that after quite a long time. Len gave me your number a long time. And then I gave you a call finally. And ever since, I have really appreciated the friendship of Michael Coughlin. He's helped me tremendously. And I really believe he's got a lot to offer men, which is why he is one of the new speakers at the Builder Summit this year. So anyway, Michael Coughlin, welcome to the Bible Thumping Wingnut podcast.
Hey, thanks. I'm happy to be here. Of course, I've got my show on the network, and so I'm part of the family already.
That's right.
But it's exciting to get to talk with you though live. I've talked to you on the phone. Right. Yeah. So this is the first time you and I have ever just done a show together. And actually, it's the first time since 4 years ago that I've talked with Len live on a show or anything. So nothing can go wrong.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. This is the first time you've been on. I set it up that way, but you have a podcast on the network. Be a Berean podcast, which is different than the Bearded Bereans. And you just put up, what did you went out of your series. Your latest episode is called Pursuing Personal Holiness. Are you one of those holiness guys?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because I have a tract here that I got from a guy who I found on Facebook who I'm wondering if he is one of those holiness guys. But no, what last night's episode that I put out was just because a friend of mine that I like to talk to sometimes, named Nathaniel Jolly, he had put a tweet out that had a lot of information packed into it, and I just asked him to unpack it, and it really came down to he thinks there's a problem in our day where preachers are afraid to preach the necessity of personal holiness for fear of being seen as works-based salvation people. And so we kind of unpacked that last night, and I posted it. I thought it went really well. He had things well thought out, and it was really just me interviewing him for the most part.
Yeah, I look forward to listening to that, because that was the thought that came to my mind. Right? Are you one of those holiness guys? So, yeah, that's a good point. And then before that, your most recent episode before that, you've been addressing something on Hemant Mehta's website. Why don't you tell us about that?
So there's a post on the Friendly Atheist website called 40 Problems with Christianity, where it wasn't Hemant who actually wrote this post. It was written by a man named Michael Runyon, who's listed as an ex-Catholic. And it's really 40 of those kind of gotcha questions or gotcha assertions about the Bible and about Christianity. They're the kinds of things that, a typical non-believer just clings to because it confirms their bias against Christianity. And so I've just been offering people some really simple ways to just read what it says and sort of be critical about it, so that people would be ready to respond to these kinds of things. It's the kind of thing that when I was in college, if somebody would have shown me a few of these statements, I would have said like, oh, that's deep. In fact, let me find one of them here. I don't know. I cleared my history to try to reset something. I can't find websites right now, but it's stuff like, the Romans rewrote the Gospels to have an anti-Jewish flavor, or, Jesus.
Wait, are you saying they didn't?
You need to listen to Be a Berean on the Bible Thumping Wingnut network, Len, and that'll help you out. But my point is that, and I said this at the beginning, I'm just going through these objections to Christianity, and I'm not digging terribly deep to refute them. It's kind of a, hey, let's just look at this and just think about it really basically. And these are the kinds of questions that your average college student is walking around believing. Things like the Bible was written, at the Council of Nicaea. Some of those kind of just real garbage statements people make, and so it's been fun. I started looking at it, and the way it's gone is I've gone through all 40 objections in my family devotions with my teenage children, and so I gave my teenage children a chance to be challenged by some of these objections, because they're the demographic that's being attacked by these non-Christian apologetics, we'll say. And so I was trying to see how they would respond, how their faith would be challenged. And so we went through these objections, and then it's kind of simple then to just turn on a microphone and talk about them myself, get some content up there. I've had a couple people say they've really enjoyed them, they've learned from them. So it's an exercise in logic and really just faithfulness to the Bible.
Both of you men are world-renowned street preachers. People might not know that about you, Michael. Michael, how did you?
They don't know I'm not very renowned, but.
Len, did you see what Len did today?
Yeah, I saw Len went and but you did like patriot stuff, right? Protesting and.
Yeah, I went to there's Wisconsinites Against Excessive Quarantine. There was a rally to reopen Wisconsin. Good. Essentially because our tyrannical governor extended the quarantine arbitrarily for another 30 days, well beyond his 60-day emergency powers grant him. So, yeah, there's rallies all over the state. There was one yesterday in Brookfield, Wisconsin, that about 1,200 showed up to. The one I was at today had probably somewhere between 500 and 700. And there will be one on Saturday at the Capitol building. And then again on Saturday in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. There'll probably be 20 to 50,000 in Madison. We affectionately call Madison Moscow West here in Wisconsin. But we went with our cross. Actually, I don't know if you can see this. But
praise the Lord. Is that Evan?
That's Chloe.
That's Chloe. I just couldn't see it real well.
Me and Chloe built these crosses years ago. I mean, Chloe was maybe 9 years old.
Hold it up. Hold it up while you're speaking, so that it'll show up if you speak.
So we had originally a cross that was built out of 1x4s and spray painted with red paint, and we left it outside our house, and somebody stole it. So we built a sturdier one out of 2x6s and stained it and routed out "Are you ready?" and painted it in white. And we used to go on these crosswalks all the time, but we went to the rally today because I firmly believe that as Christians, and this is something I haven't been very good at lately, I've been kind of ranting about rights on Facebook. For anybody who follows me, they know what I'm talking about. But I'm convicted we need to start talking about the God who grants us rights. If we're going to, as Christians, talk about rights, I believe we should be standing for our rights as Americans and as Christians. But I think we have a primary responsibility as Christians to talk about the God who grants those rights to us. So I just grabbed a handful of tracts when we walked out of the house, and we gave out about 100 tracts in 3 minutes. And then I was out. I was like, oh, didn't grab enough. Because it's in a very small town. I wasn't sure there would be 100 people there. So I was like, yeah, this ought to be enough. It wasn't, but God will use it. So, yeah. That's what I did today. And I took Friday off. I'll be going to the protest in Madison also to preach the gospel and talk about the God who gives rights. So
Is that the state that they closed through May?
Yeah. All the states around us are opening May 1st, April 30th or May 1st. So, yeah, it's crazy.
Michael, what's your view on that?
On the closings?
People want to. I've had who have I had on? I've had
Dustin and
I had Dustin and Adam on, and they're on the kind of, well, Len is Adam and Dustin are more okay. This is a good thing. We need to really be careful, and for the most part, be conservative. People are asking for Austin Hessler to come on because Austin's been very. Len, you've seen Austin's posts?
I've shared a couple, actually, yeah.
Austin's very vocal. Austin went to a protest?
Yeah.
And,
Austin was here yesterday.
What do you mean here?
In Columbus,
Ohio.
Yeah, and he'll be here next Saturday, and I hope I'm not spoiling a surprise, but we're going to preach together down at the Columbus protest next week.
Awesome.
Yeah, so my take is that this may come across harsh, but I don't trust a government that can't tell how many genders there are and can't figure out that a baby in the womb should be protected. So I don't trust their medical advice when it comes to something else.
Have you seen the health secretary of Pennsylvania?
Yes. I mean, like to me it's just a joke. And so if the government, I don't think the government has the right to do some of what they did. I don't think it was logical. And even if the government has some emergency rights, I think there was mistakes made. In fact, I was just getting ready to post a picture I saw on a private page, and it was a picture that said, let me see if I can find it. See if you can you see that? Nah, no, you can't. How do you?
Yeah, we can.
Nope, that's not going to work. Okay, so the picture says, special needs families are suffering. It's a big poster somebody made. And it says, my kiddo has been declined all therapy since this started. No occupational therapy, speech therapy, pool therapy, and no physical therapy. So you got people at home with their special needs kid that were relying on being able to take their kid places to grow and learn and maybe develop. And all these things have been shut down. And so my opinion is there were some mistakes in the shutdowns. I'm not saying that the government can't try to do something, but I don't trust it, and I haven't seen a reason to say, oh, well, I should have trusted the government. But having said that, I'm in a situation where sort of just doing what they say is really what I need to do. And so I've just taken advantage of the places where I can go and continue to minister the gospel. So they canceled the big event that I would have been at last weekend, the Ohio State Buckeyes spring game. And they canceled that. So that was one place I didn't get to go. And then the big event in March I would have gone to went from being close to 250,000 people to 5,000 people. And so what I've been doing is just going to Planned Parenthood, because in Ohio, Planned Parenthood's still an essential service. And it's something that they will not stop them from doing. And so we've been going to Planned Parenthood and preaching the gospel. And then when I started to notice that there's these protests going on where there's actually large crowds of people, larger than anything we've seen in a month and a half now, I started to get a little bit excited. And I thought, wow, I need to go down there and just preach the word. And I'm in a couple of these private Facebook groups with these people that are anti-quarantine, and I sympathize with their political view. I think I might agree with the fact that the state should be opened up and businesses shouldn't be so shut down by the government as they seem to have been. But some of these people are just vile. And I don't feel comfortable standing side by side with them, even in a anti-government protest. I'd rather go and just be a voice for the Lord Jesus Christ, and maybe providentially this is one of the times they're out and they'll get to hear the gospel. And if somebody doesn't want to hear the gospel or rejects the gospel, then that's I guess I'm sort of used to that. What I don't want to do is go down to a protest and basically stand hand in hand with somebody protesting and then walk away and they're still bound for hell. Like I'd rather be there preaching. So.
Right. I admire that about you and about Len. I mean, I'm more passive in this whole situation. I'm like, I see the folly of what government choices. I see some wisdom in some of it, and I'm like, it's providential, and I'm gonna go about my day. I'm not gonna get all. I am gonna post some stuff about it on social media. I'm not a go out and protest guy, and I'm not a street preacher guy who goes out on the street. But I admire you guys because, I mean, even though Len is much more, he's much more concerned about what's going on with the government than I am. He's still focused on his faith. He's like, this is an opportunity to share the gospel. And as fired up as Len has been about this whole thing, I was like, wow, there he is carrying the cross out there, because first and foremost is the gospel. Secondly is I've got rights but the Constitution gives me rights, and I'm upset about that. But I like the balance, I like.
It's got to be it's not an either or thing to me. To me, this is a both and issue. It's look, our Constitution of all governing documents that have existed in history, the Constitution of the United States is exceptionally theological. Just read the preamble of the Constitution, and when you read even like the Federalist and Anti-Federalist papers, where the founders debated whether we should even write down what our rights are. The debate was, should we even put these on paper? Because if we put these on paper, people are going to think that this is the thing that grants the rights and not the God who created us and granted them to us. So there was a big debate about how to even go forward with this. And when you read the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist papers and the Constitution, I mean, these were deeply theological men who thought very deeply on the issues of God and rights and individual sovereignty. And they recognized, property rights are explicit in Scripture. I mean, it's assumed in "thou shalt not steal." And James Madison went even further when he talked about the property of our thoughts. That even our thoughts, our words, are property. They uniquely belong to us, and we own them, and nobody has the right to them, to control them in any way or aspect whatsoever. So there's a great deal of theology and gospel that we can bring into these conversations. Now, the problem is when you go to a Republican rally, you have a lot of people who are God, guns, and country, and not necessarily in that order. And so you have a lot of people who are inoculated to the true gospel, a lot of false converts, and there's an opportunity to bring the true gospel to these people. But I think that it would be wise to expect the same hostility as you would anywhere. I mean, tell me I'm wrong. The hardest people to preach the gospel to are people who are convinced that I love God, man. I love God. Those are some of the hardest people in the world you will preach to. Sometimes atheists are more reasonable. So yeah. So just to summarize, I mean, I think that it's like I said, when I'm going to, I'm very interested in our rights and the defense of our rights because of the theology behind them. In fact, if the founders are right, and I believe they are, that our rights are granted to us by God, then it is quite likely, and I think I would even argue it is a blasphemy to tyrannically trample somebody's rights, because you are trampling the image of God, just like with abortion. Abortion is a blasphemy against a God because of what it is that you're destroying. It's someone created in his image. So Michael might argue differently, and I don't know if I've thought it through as theologically as I ought to, but just in the course of this conversation, that comes to mind, that, you know, if our rights are given to us by God, then to trample another person's rights is a blasphemy against God. And that's why definitionally it's a crime for me to steal from Michael is to take his property rights. And in so doing, I give up my rights. And that's why we have a prison system, right? So anyhow, I should probably stop. Otherwise I'm going to dominate the conversation with my rants.
I won't disagree with you. I don't know if I'd call it blasphemy necessarily, but it's certainly when you break the second table of God's law, steal from people, murder them, commit adultery, you are first violating the first part of God's law, that is that you ought to love the Lord your God and not have any other gods. And I don't think people think about it that way anymore. And I think it's one of the things we've encountered. Somebody said this to me the other day, that some of the original founders said, this is a great government as long as people are like generally moral. And as soon as you start to get to this point where it's just way out there, you're going to have problems. Because I've said this for a few years. I'm on Twitter, and I tolerate like anything, but I don't tolerate nudity or scantily clad women. And I don't tolerate blasphemy. Those two things I can't have in my feed. I can tolerate all sorts of other things. And I've had to block more conservative Republican women for their provocativeness than Democrats. And it's because conservative people, they're not really conservative anymore. And but yeah, I agree with what you said, Len. I think that we have to recognize, though, that the founding fathers knew this, that tyrants would come. And that's why they wrote the documents the way they did, was so the people could be protected from little tyrants. And so we start to look at what the government's doing, and we lack trust. And I think people make a mistake when they pull out Romans 13 and 1 Peter 2 and act like those things mean we're supposed to trust the government. And they may not say that, but sometimes it's implied. I think we need to be careful. It's one thing to submit. And sometimes submission means, well, I'm going to still go do what God has given me a right to do, and I'm going to suffer the penalty for it. But I'm not going to submit by just not doing the thing. That's why we'll go stand and preach even when it becomes illegal. But I'm going to submit to the consequence of it. I'm going to submit to that. I'm not going to just not preach because they say don't preach, though. And I think that people, I think in our culture, we haven't had to think these things through practically.
Yeah.
A lot of us have never had to think through, well, what would happen if I was poor?
Right.
Most of us have never really had to think through, well, what if I really couldn't work for 6 months and there really wasn't help?
And
food shortages.
And what we're realizing is our trust hasn't been in Christ. It's been in this culture, this government, this country that we have, that we enjoy so much prosperity. That's where our comfort is. And now, when looking back 2 weeks, when 2 or 3 weeks ago, maybe 2.5 weeks ago, when it was all doom and gloom, right? I mean, we didn't know where the curve was going to flatten out. And we're thinking, what we need to worry about, water and the power grid and get your rice and all this other stuff. That's when a lot of people like myself were like, well, wow, why am I so uncomfortable? Why am I so uncomfortable? God is sovereign, and he promises to provide everything that I need. That doesn't mean that I won't suffer. But we all preach and we agree that the Lord is faithful even in the storm. But to say that in the storm, to live that in the storm is completely different. And I think for me, I realized that some of my comfort was, hey, I'm an American. I have this wonderful country. I've got a job. I've got all these things. But then when you come to the realization that, wow, how fragile is it actually, right? The United States is not as firm and safe and secure as we think it is. It all can fall apart. It can all turn into tyranny. It can all turn into complete chaos real quick.
Which is why I think there is a great value to the protesting that's going on, and people waking up to the fact that they do not need the government. They don't need the government's permissions to exercise their rights. Look, it's going to be a great time for the next few years to be a constitutional attorney, because there are going to be some massive lawsuits. And the Nazis in Nuremberg, just doing my job, they didn't get away with it. Those men hanged. So police and these hirelings of the state who are exercising these unconstitutional orders are going to be held to account. There's no question about it. But I mean, people are waking up to the fact that, why do I need a liquor license to sell liquor? Why am I giving the government, whether it's a city, a municipality, a county, or a state, this power over me to freely trade with a liquor distributor and then an end user of the liquor, for example? I'm not saying I love the taverns, okay? That's an example that immediately comes to mind.
Yeah, for the Presbyterians and Lutherans.
But you quoted John Adams, who actually, his quote is, "Our Constitution was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other," because religious people recognize a higher authority, whereas a humanist recognizes themselves as the greatest authority in their lives, right? So that's why, what are rights? What are rights to one bag of stardust banging against another bag of stardust? Doesn't matter.
And along the lines of what you were saying, and we kind of got off of what Tim said, but is that what we're seeing in our culture right now? We don't see Christians only like out protesting. This is not something that requires you to be born again and have an understanding of Calvinism and things to go protest. This is basic, this is natural law. This is stuff people understand because God's law has been written on their hearts. And it was actually the justification of a pastor friend of mine who said, even though, I don't know if his state has extended their stay-at-home order, but they had canceled church, my friend's church. And one of the reasons was they wanted to be a good testimony before men. They didn't want to do things that would cause people to look at them as if they were not loving their neighbor. And so they were trying to be careful. And he said that they had already scheduled their next service, regardless of what their governor says. And he said one of the reasons was, once they saw even the heathen out in the street protesting, he said, look, it's obvious to everyone that this is not right at this point. He said, we're not going to bring reproach on Christ by meeting as a church today, because everybody knows we ought to be allowed. And so you can kind of look around and see the answers to how the government should respond, and how as people we should want to respond to it then. But I want to get back to what Tim said a little bit. I appreciate, he said, are we really trusting Christ in the situation? And I think that for a lot of people, this has got to be a really good heart check. And in some cases, we'll say, well, what do you mean by trusting Christ? Well, in one case, it could be, have you stopped buying stuff you don't need so you have a little savings? That doesn't necessarily mean you're trusting in your money because you save money, if you're being a good steward, because part of trusting Christ is doing things the way he said. And it's the Bible that teaches us to look to the ant, you sluggard, and to, store things up for the future. And the Bible tells us that if a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat. And so part of trusting Christ is looking at the whole of your life and realizing that not only that, oh, if something bad happens, I trust that he'll get me my food like he feeds the sparrows. You know, we kind of understand that aspect of it. But more part of it too is, how do we live our life where we realize, wow, like how am I wasteful? How have I not been a good steward of the rights God's granted me? You know, how many times have I had the option to speak up, maybe for the weak, for the innocent, for people whose rights are trampled, and I just thought, well, it's not affecting me, so who cares? And I want to be the kind of person who, even though I didn't lose my job, and even though my company was deemed essential, so my company is still making some money, so there's a little less worry about that kind of thing. In my case, I want to still care about the other people who this has affected more immediately. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. All three of us, our industries we all have our jobs, all three of us.
Yeah, but they're getting slammed. You know, at least in my business, it's getting slammed. You know, aftermarket truck parts is down 38%. OEM truck parts are down like 22%. Anything coming in from overseas has to sit in quarantine for 14 days before it even goes to customs. And after that, it has to sit in quarantine for another week. So rail traffic is down 80%. So yeah, it's and you deliver food, Tim. You see what's happening to the food market.
Yeah, and that's going to trickle down. You're right, but like you and I and Tim, we haven't had to worry about our next mortgage payment.
Right, not yet.
Because we haven't been hit like some people. I mean,
right.
there's businesses just shutting down, saying, "Well, we can't continue."
Right, and
we need to stand up for those kind of people. I think to some extent, you know,
I put on Facebook that any support that opens its business on Monday will forever have me as a customer. Now that doesn't mean every strip club, porn shop.
Yeah, I thought about starting a business where we just take donations.
But look, man, you don't need the government's permission. In fact, the government, if the government harms a business, then the government owes that business money. It's the Fourth Amendment that we have the right to redress against our government, right? So it's no different really than eminent domain. And I've been listening to podcasts from constitutional attorneys who go through the specific amendments and everything. And my thing is, you don't need the government's permission to operate your business. Just open. I mean, if Walmart can mitigate when it's letting in 200 people at a time, and they can mitigate, why can't the mom and pop hardware store? Why can't the tavern mitigate? Why can't the restaurant mitigate? If Walmart can do it, what makes them special? You know, I don't see them looking for MBAs like as part of their hiring process. They're looking for these super highly qualified, specialized people. They're just people, just like I posted on Facebook earlier, you know, that 3 million people were laid off who work in the restaurant industry. But the airlines are getting a bailout. I use restaurants an awful lot more than I use airlines. And I think that's true of everybody I know and everybody I have ever known. I don't know anybody who uses airplanes more than they use restaurants. So why are they getting bailouts? Not that I agree with bailouts, but there's an arbitrary imbalance being imposed on by the government. And Brother Michael, you nailed it perfectly. Why are we trusting a government? This is probably the most perfect statement I've heard on the whole thing. The government that doesn't know how many genders there are and doesn't have the sense to protect innocent life, babies in the womb, is not a government that can be trusted with any decision. And yet we concede our rights to them and say, okay, I will just humbly and willfully accept this house arrest, which is what it is. I'm not sick. I'm not under quarantine. I'm under house arrest.
Have you guys worn a mask yet?
I ordered mine today.
Everywhere I go.
Even at your protest?
Especially at the protest.
I ordered a mask today. So
look,
you can't get into grocery stores anymore without these, Michael, around here.
Yeah, in Ohio, I will give Ohio credit. We've had a very good, compared to other governments. Our government is overreach has been less, and I think in some cases there's been some doublespeak where the governor has actually kind of said, "Hey, I never told you had to shut down. It was just a suggestion." But it was kind of one of those strong suggestions, and I think some people suffered from that. But he's putting on the timer.
Hey,
here.
Len, you and I, if we can just get on the whole government thing. There are people working at the same place. Some have been laid off and others remain working. The folks who have been laid off are now making more money staying home than those who are still working. And Len, you and I talked one day. I remember where I was when we were talking about this. But the stimulus package of $2.2 trillion really was approved and pushed really fast before anybody even missed a paycheck. And then when Len, you went from, doom and gloom to, hey, wait a minute, we're being lied to by everybody. This probably isn't as bad as we think it is. I said to you, I was like, wow, they really, maybe that's why they pushed that 2.2 trillion through so fast, because in another week and a half, it might not be justified.
Where are you going to spend that money though? When there's no milk and meat to buy, where are you going to spend the money?
Yeah, that's the other thing, is the only people that can get that is Walmart and the stores they left open, right?
Well, part of the 2.2
yeah.
Part of the 2.2 trillion, of course, is the $600 a week people are getting on top of regular unemployment.
Yeah, Bible Thumping Wingnut Patreon. Make sure you plug that. If anybody's got extra.
Oh man, my battery warning just came on. I gotta relocate.
It's because of your governor.
Oh.
Was this what you expected to talk about tonight?
Actually, I have some questions down that I had written down. That it's always a joy to have Len here, and I've been inviting him to come on, and wasn't sure if he was going to come on. Michael, how did you come to know Christ as your Savior?
How did I come to know Christ? I was one of these terrible pagans. I did a lot of sins. I would have what a lot of people would consider a rather exciting testimony and past. And one thing I was not was a false convert. I knew enough about Christianity that I knew I didn't want it. And I knew that I kind of had a sense of what you had to believe. And when I was 30 years old, I was going through a divorce and I was hurting, and I started going to church with one friend of mine who was going to church. And it was kind of a seeker sensitive deal, which probably is the only thing I would have tolerated at the time. And I was sort of an open spiritual guy. Like, I was also reading about dream interpretation, and I was trying to do some other weird stuff, and I was into yoga and new age things. But I started going to church, and I thought it was really weird because I knew enough about the Bible that I knew I didn't believe a lot of it, even though I could believe some of it. But I knew you sort of had to believe all of it in order to make sense of it. And I just couldn't get past some of the miraculous stuff was too much for me. And so I got a Bible from my friend, and it was a Today's New International Version Bible, which a lot of people would consider total garbage. But I committed to reading a couple pages of the Bible every day. And after about 5 days of that, I was just sure that Jesus was God, that God was, that God, I can't say I was sure that God would have been just to punish me, but I knew that God was gonna. And I asked him if he would forgive me because of what Jesus did. I think what I said is, God, will you let me into heaven because of what Jesus did? And that was my version of the sinner's prayer. And so that was about July 4, 2006. And I do believe I got saved at that moment, even though there was a whole lot of stuff I didn't understand yet. And I have some immediate evidence in my life of salvation that was just, looking back, I didn't even understand how it happened, but it was mind blowing to me later to think about. So I was a terribly racist person before I got saved, and like, some people are racist, but they kind of hide it, and then they slip once in a while. I was like the guy who was openly racist and proud of it. And a few days after I got saved, I got some email it was like a racist joke or video, and I forwarded it to a bunch of people because I was totally unashamed of being racist. And this guy who I don't think is a believer came up to me, who I knew in person, and he actually poked me right in the sternum. He was an old guy. I was 30, he was probably 60. And all he said to me, he said, "You're better than that." And I knew exactly what he was talking about. And I came under total conviction about this. This is without reading a lot of scripture or hearing a lot of sermons, or, I hadn't met Kyle J. Howard, so he couldn't teach me how racist I was or anything like that. And I just came under total conviction. And all of a sudden, God started kind of bringing to my mind my hidden sin. And I would notice how often throughout the day I would just have hateful thoughts. And he just washed it away so quickly. It was like within a week of being saved, I became a person who loved other people. So another funny part of that concept, though, I was thinking about this just the other day, Tim, is one group of people that I made fun of my whole life were Jews. They're just easy picking, and I just made Jew jokes, and I just made jokes.
I was going to ask you about that.
I would make fun of Jews, and I knew all the jokes, and I mean, they were bad, and I just thought they were all funny, and I didn't care who was a Jew or who they were or anything. And now I found out I'm half Jewish. My DNA is half Jewish. My biological father was 100% Jew, and in fact, I just met my two of my half siblings this week, and one of the things I found out is that our grandma escaped Poland right before the Holocaust started, and everyone in her family died except for her in the Holocaust. And there I was for 30 years making Holocaust jokes. And here I am, I'm the product of somebody whose whole family was torn apart by that. And so it just shows you God's grace, though, that Jesus Christ. What did I say today about Jeffrey Dahmer? Jeffrey Dahmer's sins paled in comparison to the worth of Christ's blood. And same with mine. His sacrifice was just perfect, and he was able to wash away all my sins. So that's what happened to me. God came and stole my heart.
What's important to you today?
I love preaching the gospel, and for me, that's one of my favorite things in the world to do. I don't know if I could live without it. Paul said, "Woe to me if I don't preach the gospel." And I have a wife who I love dearly, and I take very seriously what the Bible says about how a husband should love a wife. And I recognize that it's not something I can muster. This is something I have to pray that God would grant me. I can't love her on my own. And so I love my wife, and I've got 5 living children, 2 of them profess Christ, and the other 3, do not yet. So I pray for them, and I try to teach them the word, and I try to disciple my kids that do profess Christ. That's for me what's important. But I really want to be a good testimony. When I first got saved, I went to one of those churches that's like, oh, it's all grace, it's all grace. And I've since learned that, I have some responsibilities in life, like Builder Summit kind of stuff, even like, I need to get up and work, and I should work hard, and I should put in an honest day's work. And that's something I didn't do the first few years after I got saved. That was really a remnant of my past, was just not putting in a full day's work. And so I guess it's just, I want to glorify God in all I do. It sounds kind of trite probably, but I mean, that's really what I wake up thinking about, man, is I just want to take every thought captive to obey Christ.
Amen. That's some of the stuff that I really like about you.
And that is why Michael has been mentoring me for 7 years, 6 years. When would we go to our first Super Bowl outreach together? 2012?
Yeah, probably 13.
2013? Yeah, 2013.
Yeah. It's probably 13.
So, if you want to blame anybody,
yeah, I sometimes
Len's
I wish he wouldn't tell people. I'm just kidding. I love you, man. And I'll tell you what, though, people see different personalities, and people I've seen different personalities of Len in my interactions with them than sometimes I see when I see a thread online or something. And so one of the things I found is that I like trying to get to know other Christians, and like I said, God gave me a love for people, and I have a special love for God's people. And so if you come to me and if you just say you're a Christian, my initial response is, I want to love you. I want to have unity of mind. And I want to recognize 2 things. One, are you going to heaven? Because there's going to be some people that say, Lord, Lord, and they're not going to go to heaven. And I want to be enough of a challenge to them in their life that they don't go to heaven or they don't end up in hell, and nobody ever really said, hey man, why aren't you living a little better? Why aren't you, maybe this conversion never happened to you? And the second thing though is that I want to recognize when there's people in Christianity who are genuine Christians and they're seeing some things differently from me. And maybe we need to just stop fighting about it and go do our own thing in separate places. And I want to be mature enough to just say, hey, I don't have to call everybody anathema because they don't see things my way. And even if I have a bad day with them, I don't have to say, well, he's just a jerk. Like, maybe he's meant to be on the east side and I'm on the west side, and that's okay.
Yeah, man, I'll tell you, I spent some of today in repentance because of the way I've treated some of my brothers and sisters online over this issue. And I had to go to them today and apologize and ask for their forgiveness
I didn't get that phone call.
You've stayed out of my scope. You've stayed off my radar, Tim. But because that's the kind of Christian I desire to be, and I'm naturally not. My desire is to really love people, and it's really against my flesh to be like that. Like when someone, especially when I was really hard and heavy into the open air preaching, when people profess themselves as Christians to me, my first thing was to play 20 questions with them. and give them the Len test of orthodoxy to make sure they were actually Christians. And I realize now how sinful that was, and not giving a loving benefit of the doubt and allowing somebody grace that one thing that I've learned in kind of being the kind of person that I am is I tend to have grace towards people like me. Because I really, if you judge me based on my worst moments, whether it's online or on a podcast or on a YouTube video, man, there's no reason for anyone to be friends with me, let alone love me and want to have any kind of friendship with me.
Yeah,
so
I'll just say in the last night's episode, the Berean, I'm not trying to plug my podcast. It's on the network, so I guess it doesn't matter. But one of the things I said when I was talking to Nathaniel Jolly was sometimes we're very hard on others for their sin, and we're not hard on ourselves. And I think if we flip that around, we find ourselves just being more forgiving. Kind of Colossians chapter 3 stuff. I think it's Colossians 3:12, forgiving one another and bearing one another's burdens in love. I think if we really look at ourselves as the chief of sinners in a sense, and we realize, everybody has to be putting up with a lot to deal with me. So maybe I should be the same to them. I think it just helps my perspective sometimes to remember that, I need more grace than other people require from me.
Len, you're not saying there's not a litmus test for Christians. You're just saying that.
Look, I'm not saying that
you were a little too.
Look, I guess I was so clouded by the amount of, and any open air preacher can attest to being on campus and having someone from Crew or something come up and tell you this isn't the way to do it. This isn't how Christians love each other. And you find yourself debating some demonic professing Christian who's nothing more than a distraction. That's nothing more than a distraction to your ministry. And so then you take that from the street pulpit to every aspect of your life where you interact with other people who may or may not be Christians. Right. So, and honestly, one of the things, what was John Speed's book that was about how, like, it was something about the biblical case for open air preaching.
Evangelism in the New Testament.
Yes. I got to a point where I finally just bought up like 40 of those books. And when someone came up to me, this isn't the way you should do it, I'm like, well, read this and tell me what you think of it, rather than having a debate and letting ministry get sidelined or sidetracked because of it. So, because what a terrible testimony, two people professing to be Christians publicly arguing about doctrine. But for a long time, I would give people an orthodoxy test. Oh, you're a Christian, really? Well, tell me, who is Jesus? And it's ridiculous. My desire is truly to love people. And I think that's one of the things that.
Okay, wait. I got to back up because I'm not tracking with what you're saying. Okay. So instead of, you meet somebody, you're out hunting, and anyway,
true Christians don't hunt.
You're out somewhere, and you meet another gentleman, and he's like, and you start saying, "Hey, I'm a Christian, and my faith is very important," and he's like, "Yeah, I'm a Christian too."
Well, here's how it usually would happen: it's like from wearing a Wrath and Grace T-shirt. And someone coming up and saying, "Hey, I really like that T-shirt." Really? What do you like about it? And look, I wasn't like openly hostile. My questions were deceptive, I guess would be I had a spirit that was inwardly very untrusting, but outwardly I was like just a guy making conversation.
Maybe it's more like you were skeptical of anybody who claimed to be a Christian before.
Oh yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So let's just say
immediately loving. Right.
Okay. So before, when you would meet another guy who said, "Hey, oh yeah, I'm a Christian too," you'd be like, "Really? Okay. Well, who's Jesus? Oh yeah. Okay. Well, where do you go to church? Yeah, and how?
Oh, that was the big one right there. Where do you go to church?
How often do you read your Bible? Okay, so that's the old Len. Now, what would you do when you meet somebody and you're like, "Hey, Christianity is the most important thing to me," and this other guy, he sounds flippant. Okay, oh, I'm a Christian too. What? How do you treat him now?
Praise the Lord.
And then you leave it.
Well, I don't
because I know you don't. You want the guy to truly know Christ, and he might not. So how now? What do you do now?
Well, here's the thing: is that I have the understanding to realize that everybody's understanding is imperfect, right?
I don't even know you anymore. This is like who is this guy?
Hey, look, I ruined dinner just a few months ago with some people from our homeschool co-op that deny the Trinity.
You told me,
and I utterly ruined dinner. So look, I'll stand on the important issues, but this was a guy who was openly trying to convince me that Jesus is not God over dinner. That was a different conversation. All right. I went to dinner with them with the understanding that they were believers. I went there with the assumption that we're having a date night with another Christian couple with kids our age, and our families seem to have a lot in common, that, you know, so I went in there with the assumption that we're going as brothers and sisters in Christ. And when he started telling me about the Church of God that he went to, I was like, well, maybe they just don't know, because they moved up here from the South. They talked about how difficult it was to find a church that was faithful. And I can totally relate to that problem because I live in this area and I know he's right. But yeah, then when it turned into an all-out assault on the deity of Christ, it was time to pump the brakes and ruin dinner. And I didn't even feel bad about it.
Well, I'll pop in here though. And I think I understand what you're saying with, there used to be like a zealousness, like I had to prove everyone was a false convert because Paul Washer did it in a sermon once, and and it went viral, and you know what I mean?
Yes.
And it just became tedious at times, and I think a lot of times we may have been right. I mean, I've met some people on the street when I was preaching where in that moment in their life, they don't deserve assurance of salvation because of what they're doing. And so I have no reason to say, hey, brother, and hold their hand. But what I try to trust in the sovereignty of God is that I can dispense the gospel to them, and I can, in some of their cases, remind them of the gospel. And if they're unsaved, they're not going to remain unsaved because I didn't make sure they knew I thought they weren't. So that was a lot of words. The point is I can just give the gospel out freely. And if God's going to save someone, he's going to save that person. And it's not necessarily because I made them feel like they weren't saved, or I got them to admit it. And so I've just found a lot of peace from that. And when I meet Christians on the street, and the other thing is I love preaching. So I don't stop preaching. You know, if somebody comes up and wants to argue with me, well, I'm just going to kind of keep preaching, and I may interact with you if there's a reason that the things you're saying are interactable. But for the most part, you know, people come up and say, hey, thanks for what you're doing. I don't make sure to question them necessarily. And if they want to stop and talk, it may come around to to like what Len said, where we get to the point where I say, wow, I'm concerned for your salvation based on something you just said. But I don't know. I think I used to feel like you had to prove it right then and there, kind of like when you're doing your precept things with people, and sometimes you want people to fall down and admit, like, you're right. I'm not using logic correctly. I'm stealing from your worldview. And it's like, no one ever says that. Like, they're deceived. Like that. The whole point is they don't get that.
Right.
So you present it to them in the hopes that God will grant them repentance. And that may happen when they're not near you. And in fact, it may be to protect guys like us from our pride. Amen. So that we can't take credit for having made this guy understand something, because you know what? He ended up understanding it while he was watching the trash man pick up his trash 2 weeks later. And you never heard about it in this life, because God knows guys like me and Len would just run with it and talk about how great we are, or at least think it in our heart.
Right.
And so I think that we just need to be very trusting of, like Tim said earlier, we have to trust Christ. And I trust Jesus Christ to use his gospel as he sees fit, even when I don't necessarily strike it in the way that I thought I had 2 years ago,
Wow. I wish we had more time. It's interesting how the Lord, it's great to know people, and for those who have watched and listened to Bible Thumping Wingnut, God is great, and you can see his work and how he's changing, and he's not changing, but he's changing. He's changing us. You can see changes in Len, and that's all to the glory of God. You can see changes in me if you watch our content over the years, and it's not because we're great and we weren't great before. It's because God is faithful, and he works in our lives, and he brings things to pass that cause us to, and even what's going on now with our government and with the health crisis, he's using that in our lives and in the lives of everyone who's watching and listening to this. So I really love you guys, and thanks for stopping by tonight. One of the things I said last week and the week before is that the Builders Summit is all about helping men, and I have invited speakers to come who have helped me, and I want to expose other men to the guys who have really encouraged me and strengthened me in the faith and challenged me, and so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have Michael on tonight. And a major prayer request would be for God to really chastise Len to the point that he would commit to go to the Builder Summit as well. Get his priorities straight. So Len's come a long way, but he just needs to go a little bit farther to commit to that Builder Summit. Right, Michael? Michael knows.
Absolutely. And I know why Len hasn't committed, and at least I know one reason, and I gave him my advice on how that could be worked out, and we'll see what happens with that. I promise to stay 6 feet away from you, if that's your concern, Len.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm gonna, if you guys can mute yourself, I'll wrap this up with a little bit of promotion, and thanks for viewing, everybody. Thanks for watching. This has been Bible Thumping Wingnut episode 382. That means there's over 380 other episodes you can go check out at BibleThumpingWingnut.com, as well as hundreds of other podcast episodes. There's about 12 that are current over there at BibleThumpingWingnut.com. They're all worth your attention, all worth listening to. And then again, if this ministry has helped you, encouraged you, please consider supporting us. You can support us many ways. Go to Bible Thumping Wingnut and click on support our ministry. That would be greatly appreciated and much needed. So thanks again for stopping by, whether it's live on YouTube. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, thanks for stopping by. I've been reading your comments throughout this. And then may you know, you can also listen to this on a podcast version, audio only. We post that within a week at BibleThumpingWingnut.com. So you can, if you're not into video, you can listen to it on audio. And if you're listening on podcast and you'd like to watch it, in the description of this podcast is a link to go and watch it. So you can go take advantage of that. All righty. Thanks again, everybody. Thanks to Michael and to Len. And until next time, take care and God